Hello, and welcome to the High Vibrational Life podcast, where we explore how to create a life that flows by aligning with life's design, by aligning with nature. And we are living in some pretty turbulent times right now, so I couldn't be more excited to be talking today with someone who is a breath flow coach, a former monk of 10 years, and a modern mystic. So welcome, Christian.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction.
Yes, I just have to change my view here. There we go. Okay. Yes, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So why don't we start? Maybe you could share with us, what is transformational breath work and how were you initially drawn to it?
Geez. Well, that's definitely a big story. I mean, transformational breath is a spiritual self-healing technique designed to help improve your physical energy levels, integrate unintegrated emotional or unconscious emotional patterns, and ultimately connect you with higher levels of spirit or your higher being. How I got into it was, you mentioned that I was a monk for many years. I was lived as a monastic disciple for 10 years of my life, and it was at the end of that actual experience where I started getting feelings that it was time to move on, to leave. And this was a little disconcerting because joining the ashram, as we call it, the ashram or monastery in Western terms, is like kind of like getting married. I try to bridge the gap. You're making the vow to be there for life. You're focused on that being your relationship, essentially, the relationship with the divine. And so when we started getting feelings that it was time to leave, it was like, if you've ever tried to, or if anybody out there has ever felt like, contemplated getting a divorce, only think about contemplating getting a divorce, leaving your job and not having a new one to go to, and leaving your hometown and not knowing where you're going to next. Well, all three of those were part of the package of me trying to figure out whether I should leave what I dedicated my life for 10 years to, and had said that I would dedicate my life to forever. The comfort, the knowledge, all that had been there, versus going into something new where I didn't have a clue as to where I was going to go. I didn't know what I would do next. All of the lore on the inside was that the outside was a very scary place. You just don't want to go there anymore. Yeah. So all this was, but I still kept having these feelings. And it was about that time that a friend of mine in the monastery, I should say this too, that even at that time, even my meditation techniques weren't very helpful, because my emotional state was very anxious, tense. I say, if anybody's ever contemplated any of these things, there's a lot of self-doubt, a lot of questioning. Am I doing the right thing? What is the right thing? And so it was a time of emotional upheaval for myself. And this is where a friend of mine who was in the ashram at the time said, "Hey, you should try this breathwork thing out." He was always looking for cutting edge things, and he gave me a CD that I tried it out once, and I was like, "Whoa, this is kind of cool." And then, part of I don't want this to get out too much, but I snuck away from the ashram to go for a week to the Transformational Breath Seminar to really dive deep into this process. And there, it really got me in touch with my emotional nature, which is one of the big things in my life's trajectory, learning how to express emotions a lot more authentically. But it got me in touch with that emotions, and on a deeper level, really got me in touch with what I call my authentic resonance, what my soul was really calling for. And at the end of the day, to make the long story short, it was saying, go was what my soul was calling for, even though on paper, all the pros and cons lists, staying looked like it was the best option. So my first test of this new resolve was to make that leap. And so I left the monastic order, and just so happened I didn't have anything to do. And the trainings for becoming a facilitator were happening literally the week that I left. And so I jumped right into those. I became a facilitator, fast-tracked to becoming a trainer. This was more or less mid 2016. By January 2017, I opened my doors for business, and with my company Breath Flow Wellness, I've been now around for 13 years teaching and offering breathwork all over the world.
That's amazing. What I love about that story is how the breath got you in touch with your conviction. Like it was trying to bubble up and, creating all kinds of inner divide. And then you dove into the breath work, and it just seems like it was able to explode through kind of, or penetrate all your defenses.
Right. And those defenses were really the emotional garbage, what I'd say, the emotional backlog, all these things from a life of not being very emotionally expressive. These emotions continue to build and fester inside, as the great psychotherapist Sigmund Freud once said, unexpressed emotions never die, they just reemerge in darker and uglier ways. And so this is one of those ways to keep me anxious, confused, and I want to cut through all that. And how I cut through that was to actually start to let these emotions come up and be expressed. And that was the real value of the breathwork for me. And that's one of the huge values. It has value in multiple dimensions of our being, but that emotional dimension was the one that affected me the most. And I'd say the majority of people who come to me are usually, working with some kind of emotional struggle, either past trauma or just not being able to express their emotions very well, or flip side, their emotions just seem to overpower them and get the better of them at times. So, or all the time. And so it even, even though I came from a monastic background, I tout meditation as probably the highest technique that we have for really getting in touch with our true self. I would say that technique assumes that there's already a foundation of emotional work already done. And so if that work isn't done, which living in the ashram, I found that even living there, many of the guys hadn't done that foundational work. That's where the breath work really comes in and helps shore up balance and give us a new positive relationship to our emotions, that then we can climb that next level of the ladder.
Right. I love that. So I want to share one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk to you on this podcast is because I went to one of your workshops a couple years ago, and I did not know that you were going to be there, although I had probably a year prior intended to learn the breathing. Mm-hmm. So I was really, I was like, okay, synchronicity right here. And so I was really looking forward to it. Keep in mind, I had at that point 20 plus years really of solid spiritual practice. A licensed psychotherapist, author of 4 books, and been a teacher for many years. And I had like the biggest cathartic release of sadness and grief that I had no idea existed within me. And I was just blown away. I was like, how can someone, like what you just said about being at the monastery, but not having done your work?
Sorry, one of the banes of doing the podcast from a home type environment.
Oh yeah, it's all good. So anyway, it was shocking. And so I just wanted to, have you share with listeners, like, how emotions can be so out of awareness, even when we are doing the work of personal growth and development, and um, yeah, how the breathing can unlock that.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a big package, and before I get into that too, I think I was just saying, I think I said 2016 and 2017. I meant to say 2006 and 2007. That would have been 13 years ago. So
I'm not that good at math, so I was like, I'm sure he knows what he's talking about. I didn't even get there.
I was like, where did that come from? But but to answer, we have this, emotions are part of life, and I love
Yeah.
to contemplate. They're really, to me, the color of life. It's like without emotions, we're watching TV in black and white. I don't know if how many listeners out there, watchers, remember black and white TV, but emotions are like when Technicolor came into existence. All of a sudden, the experience is so much richer and so much more vivid. They're an integral part of our being. However, where we've been taught largely, I was doing some research on this. I think, they're from early days in the Greeks, where we had this whole class of warriors called the Stoics. They essentially got emotions cleared out of them. It was like emotions were considered a liability. Of course, if you think about, having to go to war and, being emotional around seeing somebody die or this or that, you're not a very good soldier. So that, there, and the trend seemed to perpetuate over the years that was a positive way to be on some level. And then I think in the Victorian age, the 18th century or so, there was this idea that hysteria was a mental disorder,
Mm-hmm.
and that people who were over emotional were ones that were prone to being hysterical. And so if you were over emotional, you actually suffered a chance of getting locked away for it. And so once again, there was a need, a protective need, not to express your emotions. And now, I'm writing a book. There's a chapter in there that's called "Big Boys Don't Cry," which is really about my experience in learning emotions. And that title says it all. It's like we're pretty much told, as especially males in this society, but I see these days as much females as males have the same issue, is that it's not appropriate to express your emotions. You're supposed to keep them down. You're supposed to have a stiff upper lip, act like nothing's wrong, get through it. But as we know, these unexpressed emotions never die. They sit there and they continue to fester, kind of like a pressure cooker whose valve is faulty. If you're cooking with pressure cooker, the pressure keeps building and building. Normally that valve pops open and lets some of the pressure out so that it stays at a reasonable level. But if that valve is faulty, it keeps building and building until it expresses in darker and uglier ways. Either that energy starts to leak out and people start acting in idiosyncratic ways. And, you've seen people who are acting a little bit off or maybe a lot off. And it's partly all these emotions built up and again start leaking out, or just builds and builds till one day finally, sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back scenario. One thing blows the whole lid, and then the whole pressure of emotions comes out. We see this with anger a lot in the news. You'll see sensational news about somebody who acted out of anger and ended up taking the life of somebody or their own life as a result. A lot of tragic results, and it wasn't necessarily that any, you know, when you read about the situations, like, well, why did that make somebody so angry and all that? It wasn't necessarily just that thing, but all of the stored emotions that were there finally came out. Or you can do what I like to say is repair that valve, and that valve in our human system is our breath. It is our breathing that helps move that energy, the energy that's stuck inside, that we've tried to. Well, I like to say the term is emotions, right? Emotion, and if you think about what E stands for, that would be energy. Energy in motion. So emotions are just energy in motion. They want to, you know, they're created within us. The thrust of their motion is to come out of us, to be expressed. But when we don't express them, we keep them inside. They're still energy in motion, so they're bouncing around and creating havoc in our system. So we have to take a tremendous amount of energy to hold that energy down, to store it in place, and so it doesn't bounce around and create havoc. But this takes a tremendous amount of energy and also a lot of tension. Holding is essentially tension in the body. And so depending on where we're holding this energy, and there's a whole map of where different emotions are stored, like anger tends to get stored in the neck and shoulders, for instance. So if you're not expressing your anger, it's getting stored there and you're experiencing tension. So you've heard the expression, he's such a pain in the neck, right?
Yeah.
That's because you're holding this anger emotion in here, you know, and you're starting to feel that pain. And so somebody who's a pain in the neck is somebody you're usually angry at, you know, you've got some beef with, and that's because you're holding that. So through the breathing, it actually accesses these emotions. It starts to help us let go, first of all, so those emotions can be free to bounce around again, but then to help us siphon off that emotional energy and help it clear, help us reduce that down to a level of pressure that is manageable. And I think that's a great analogy too, because in life we need pressure. We need a little bit of stress, a little bit of pressure is actually beneficial to life. And in fact, life without any pressure or stress doesn't have any forward movement. There's no evolution going on. So stress and pressure are beneficial to a certain level, but beyond that level, then it gets dysfunctional and can harm us as an organism.
Right. So I read something that you wrote. Each emotion has a corresponding breath pattern. And you go on to talk more about that. But I was thinking maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's great. And here's where breath and our emotions really are intimately linked, because every emotion that we have, we breathe a slightly different way with that emotion. And just in general, these emotions like fear, anxiety, stress come with generally what you call a shallower, more rapid breath pattern. The fight or flight response. And then some people add on freeze to that fight, flight, or freeze. And the freeze response typically is a holding of the breath, sort of a recoiling and a complete holding of the breath. So it's either very shallow or a complete hold of the breath. Now, with peace, love, joy, the emotions that we find more pleasant, generally speaking, they come with a deeper, more relaxed, and more fluid breath pattern. And what's significant about this is that when we have an emotion, it creates, we will physiologically go into that breath pattern. So when you're in fight and flight mode, you naturally, you know, your physiology makes you breathe that way because it's part of this whole process. But what's interesting is that the reverse is true. If you breathe that way, you will induce the fight or flight response. You'll induce anxiety or stress into your system. So if you want to feel stressed, just try breathing shallow and rapidly for about 3 to 5 minutes, and you'll start to feel agitated. Now, you're saying, like, why would I ever want to do that, right? Well, what what's sad is that most of us, or a lot of people, especially if you're experiencing chronic stress or anxiety in your life, it's likely that you've habituated your breathing to the shallower type of pattern. And so your breathing is constantly reinforcing this stress or anxiety in your life, either at low levels or in extreme cases at high levels. And so that's the good news, though, that we can reverse engineer it, because if you want to feel different, start breathing differently. So breathe in what I call a full, free flowing breath pattern, that will start to induce the happiness, the peace, the joy that comes from this type of breathing. And indeed, that's essentially the technique that they teach most often, is this full, free flowing breath pattern. And that's how we get such amazing results with people.
Yeah, so maybe you could talk a little bit about that methodology, and can people do it at home? Because I know you coach people through it, and which is great for many people. And if they want to do it on their own, can they do that?
The short answer is yes. The breath, one of the greatest things about the breath that I love is it's yours. Nobody else has it. It's yours alone. You can take it anywhere. So wherever you go, there your breath is. So it is as close to your own portable therapy as anything
Right.
you got out there. Now, when we're learning to breathe, and that's a concept that's funny to some people. It's like, why do I need to learn to breathe? I've been breathing all my life. And I would say, yeah, you've been walking all your life too, but some people say walk on the outside of their foot, which I think is called pronation, I believe. And some people walk on the inside of their foot, and that's called supination. And either of these taken to the extreme, if you don't, nobody teaches you to walk. And so if you get in the habit of walking too much on the outer or too much inner foot, you can develop problems with your joints, your knees, your hips, and eventually that needs to be corrected. So it's like, yeah, we have this process that we just naturally do, but as soon as we get hit by any trauma in life, it starts to modify the way that we breathe. And just like I was talking about chronic anxieties and stuff like that, as we modify the way we breathe, and if we don't learn to correct it back over time, we start developing dysfunctional habits of breathing. So, yes, people can do it on their own, but before doing that, it's kind of good to learn how to breathe correctly. So I use the example, if you want to play violin, you could learn to do it on your own. You could try to figure out the fingerings, what the notes are, how to use the bow, all this kind of stuff. It may take you years to get to a point of proficiency, just trying to figure it out on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can hire a teacher. The teacher can show you some scales, show you proper bow action, this and that. You learn that over time, and and then before you know it, you're an expert at it, and you can take it on your own and learn from there. So I would say that with breath work, is that if you can learn and figure it out on your own, and that and there is some value to that. But if you want to sort of get a baseline of what healthy, proper breathing is really like, and get that ingrained in your physiology before you then go off and explore and do it on your own, that's what I recommend most. And of course, that's why I'm in business, and how I help people is to get them to learn how to become aware of their breath patterns, how to understand. I facilitate people through sessions. So, typically people will get into the proper pattern, and then over time they'll ease back into their habituated pattern. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, hey, keep, remind them for the fullness, remind them of the relaxation, remind them to keep it fluid. And over time, that starts to replace their old habits, and they start having these new habits of breathing. Mm-hmm. And that's the point when then, I encourage them to take it on their own and say, feel confident that you can explore this without falling back into old habits of breathing that just reinforce dysfunctional patterns.
Yeah, it's a really practical tool. And like you said, it's very accessible. And the idea of doing your own therapy, we have to at a point, you go and you get perspective and you get tools. And at a point we have to apply these things in the moment. And breath is the best way to do that, to keep our ourselves aligned and also, in physiological harmony. A lot of times I talk about flow, the nature of life, which is flow, and reverse flow. And when you talk, it sounds to me like stress breathing is almost related to reverse flow. It's like trying to suck out adrenaline, and instead of just generating authentic life energy through full breaths.
Mm. Very well put. And I resonate highly with that idea of flow. In fact, that's why I call my company Breath Flow. And I have this concept of life being flow, that what life is a movement. It's not a static beingness. It is a continuous movement of beingness. And so when we say we're in the flow, we're actually aligned with the natural movement of life itself. And when we feel out of sync and such, it's because we've actually stopped the flow somewhere along the way. And that, going back to that whole emotional thing, emotions are meant to move. The flow of emotions is to come from within and be expressed without. But when we're holding on to that energy, where we are essentially putting a dam to that natural flow that wants to happen. And of course, then we feel not so good. We don't feel as good because we're not in alignment with the natural flow of life.
Yeah. So, Christian, what would you say to someone who is not in an environment where they can be authentic and be in their own flow and express emotions, whether it's a home environment or a work environment that doesn't appreciate authenticity? What would you say to them?
Get out of that environment.
Amen.
Of course, easier said than done, right?
Right.
But there's a lot of truth in that. There's to recognize that we are, a lot of times we say, well, I can't get it out of that environment. It's my home. And I'd say there is definitely some considerations to say that, yes, I'm in this environment because it's giving me something that's sort of necessary for my survival. But then we've always got to look at it in terms of what it's not giving us, or what it's giving us that's compromising our survival or our happiness or our well-being. And so I'd say to express yourself authentically is the essence of life itself. I mean, you were born as this being that was meant for something, and that thing is your authentic expression. It doesn't look like somebody else's thing. It's not meant to conform to a standard. It is and if when you don't express that, it starts to eat away at the integrity of your soul, essentially. And if that goes on too long, it will actually manifest as physical ailments and maladies. And if it goes on longer, it could actually bring you to not existing on this planet anymore.
Exactly.
It's that's significant. So to see that we ultimately have choice, we ultimately have free will, and there's, to say, well, I need this job because whatever, but it's sucking your soul out. That you ultimately are the one who's choosing to stay there or not, right there. You can make a different choice. How to make that choice is really to start to understand your priorities. And when you realize that your authenticity is probably the highest priority that you have, rather than what I think we do is say, well, because this job is providing my, my rent every month or whatever, that's the high priority. And my authenticity is really a lower priority because I couldn't live without rent money and all that. But then, but we get myopic and say that job is not the only place we can procure that rent money. There's an infinite amount of opportunities out there. And though in the moment it seems like this is the only thing, and we're very, reticent to let go of something secure.
Yeah.
Again, we have to remember, you have to prioritize your mental, emotional, and ultimately spiritual health above, anything else that environment is giving you.
Absolutely. That's why I love what we both do is teach what I call life's design, or our nature. We're teaching how to align with your authentic nature. And I think once people understand that it's physics, it's not, flow isn't just a psychological concept. It's a literal movement of energy. And once we understand that we are built to have that energy, whether it's emotional or creative or otherwise, move through us, that I think speaks to the priorities that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can just say, okay, where am I not in flow? And what do I need to do at this point to adjust? And I don't know if you have this experience, but my experience with myself and working with people is that when we show up as our authentic self, when a situation is not aligned with who we are, it naturally falls away. Right?
Yes. There's a lot to that. And I'd say the main thing that keeps us from doing that is our own fears of what will happen if we do. And we make up the worst case scenario. I know this for a fact because that's what my mind does. When there's an unknown, it's just, it seems natural that we go to, well, this could happen or that could happen. And that's our ego basically trying to protect us, saying, don't go venturing out into unknown territory, stay in safe known territory. But that actually was my second point, besides getting out of the environment, was practice expressing your authenticity, even though you said, an environment that doesn't allow you to express your authenticity. Well, again, who's not allowing you to? Oftentimes we think that we're not allowed to be authentic. And so we're the ones that are suppressing that authenticity. Mm-hmm. So if you start actually risking being authentic in these environments that you think not, oftentimes you'll be surprised at how the situation shifts. As soon as you're authentic, all of a sudden there's a whole space for authenticity to open up where everybody else starts being authentic. I mean, one of the principles of communication we're talking about, self-disclosure begets self-disclosure, right? So meaning, if you want people to express emotions authentically, express them authentically yourself first. And then you'll see that people feel safe enough to express them. But if you're waiting for them to do it first, then they might not feel that safety because they haven't seen that that's safe enough to do in the environment yet.
Exactly.
And then as you're saying, as you express, those things that aren't in alignment with your authenticity often fall away. And those that don't fall away are the challenges for you to meet in life that are going to take you to the next level. That's where the rubber meets the road, about you staying in your authenticity despite the fact that sometimes it's hard.
Right. Which is where the breathing can come in, and meditation as well, because I view both of them as a lifeline. It's a way to stay connected to our soul. And if we are so busy out there chasing what we want instead of expressing and creating, then there's a disconnect there. So I can see the breathing is just so valuable.
I like that. I don't know that I've thought that concept before, but breath is literally our lifeline. You know, I mean,
Literally.
it is the, and as my spiritual teacher, Paramahansa Yogananda would say, breath is the cord that ties the soul to the flesh. So it is this thing that keeps our connection between our physical beingness and our more etherical beingness.
Yes. Speaking of Paramahansa Yogananda, you were in Encinitas when you were a monk. Is that right?
Encinitas and then Los Angeles. So
Okay. Okay.
the organization of Yogananda, the headquarters is in Los Angeles. The training center and a smaller ashram center is in Encinitas. So I was in Encinitas for my training, and then most of my time I was up in the Los Angeles ashram.
Encinitas meditation garden is, I mean, I haven't seen the whole world, but from what I've seen, it's the most beautiful, holy place in the world.
You could thank me and all of the monks to be, because that was our work, was pretty much like
Wow.
picking every dead leaf off of every flower so that it could have the pristine outer appearance. Of course, what makes it the most beautiful place in the world, and this is what Yogananda said specifically, was that places hold the vibration of what people bring to it. And the meditation gardens, people go there specifically to meditate, to commune with the divine. And every person that goes in there amplifies that vibration of meditation. So the place, after a while, starts to hold that vibration, and it becomes easier to step into that, that vibrational flow, even because it's already resonating there. And then you get into it and you add your little piece, and it just continues to become a greater and greater container for that.
Absolutely. Container, great word. And the ocean doesn't hurt.
No, definitely.
No.
It's got a way of a nice cleansing vibe that keeps
Right.
flowing through.
Right. Right. I was supposed to be there last week, but due to the COVID situation, I obviously canceled that trip, but
Go to the retreat there?
no, I just stay at a Airbnb close by. So
And visit Encinitas and the area
yes,
and all that. Yeah, beautiful.
yes.
Make sure
Huh.
you do once everything is kosher again.
Exactly, exactly. So we spoke briefly before when we were setting this up about how breath and flow, how it leads to freedom. It's just so related to freedom. And I think it's easy to feel like even if we're in a good environment, it's easy to feel like we have some kind of internal prison. What are your thoughts on how this breath work can help free us?
Well, I'd say freedom to the two aspects of the divine, and I call them the masculine and feminine aspects, is love and freedom. I say love is the feminine aspect of the divine, and freedom is really the masculine expression. Depending on whether we're man or woman, we have both of those. That's just a descriptive analogy here. So freedom, from a spiritual perspective, is an inner game. And in fact, we're talking about, I just had a call earlier, a coaching call, and this was one of the things. The guy was really putting his value on external validations and things. If he accomplished this, or people praise him for that. And as long as you're looking for external things to help you feel good about yourself or help you feel free, as soon as those external things are taken away or not present anymore, then you don't feel it. So the bottom line is you're not free, because you are a prisoner to an external circumstance, whether it's having something or whether it's, a person or a thing or money or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So freedom inherently has to be an inner game. I think when I think of this, I think of Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for like 20 some odd years. And in that time, he said he found true freedom, because he recognized that no matter where the body was, no matter where this physical form was in life, and it could be in jail, that his soul was still free to express, to be creative, to be in connection with that higher power. And indeed, this is I was reflecting on this because of this COVID situation, and so many people, all of us were kind of in, what do they call it when you're in jail in your home?
Oh, quarantine. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, our quarantine was
Oh,
like being at jail in your own home. And in a lot of ways, people were denied the ability to express certain distractions and things that would normally make you feel free, because you could get away from something. You could get away from that. A lot of people are experiencing, that there was some relational tension in the household, because normally you could just escape it and go to the bar or go to the game or go wherever.
mm-hmm.
Now you have to actually be there and face it. But of course, that's the good news, because the only way that we can get out of our garbage is kind of to go through it. And again, that's what breath work is such a powerful thing, because it can help you to go through your emotions, go through your limitation consciousness. Basically, when we're talking about freedom here, we're breathing, and it's starting to dredge up all of the ideas, the beliefs, the experiences that haven't been fully integrated yet, that have caused you to feel limited or cause you to feel less than completely free. And I'd say, that ideal of freedom is when we fully can authentically express, right? When we are fully expressing ourselves authentically, that is our expression of freedom. And these things get in the way of that and make us modify it. And so as we work with the breath and we clear out another layer of trauma, or we express an emotion that's been sitting there in the back closet for decades, these things then open up the space for, that flow, that, the new life energy that's striving to get in at all times to be there. And then we experience what we would call freedom, or that sense of freeness in our lives.
Exactly. I agree that quarantine, which you might have been thinking about house arrest as your term, but
That's right. Yeah.
yeah. So quarantine, I agree. I think it is such a tremendous opportunity for people who are willing to take it, because what happened was that all the landscapes that our energy was previously flowing through were blocked off, and all we're left with is our energy. And it was the voice of life in that situation was amplified. And so if we're listening, then it's telling us, this landscape was nourishing, this landscape was toxic, this, and it's an opportunity to actually talk about transformative, to transform our lives, because we have all the energy, and if we pay attention, all the insight. So
Beautiful.
yeah, I think with breathing, what's come to me in the past is that there are 3 levels that we have. Action and growth is a process, and that the first thing we get, the first step, is clarity. And clarity often happens with breathing and just present moment awareness. And then the second step, which is what you experienced when you went to that first breathing workshop, is conviction. And then, and the clarity builds a little and it bursts through and it gives you that conviction, like, yes, this is something that is right for me. I feel it in my soul. And then the third level is courage. once you have the conviction, if you just sit with it a little bit longer and keep paying attention to it, it builds up until it becomes courage, and we take action.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'd agree with that, those steps. And another way we put it, awareness is the pillar of yoga, they would say in the monastic order, which means that, to get that clarity is the foundation there. You need, before you can make any sort of change or be convicted about anything, you need clarity of the landscape. You need to understand what is going on, and that's the difference between what I call the unconscious path versus the conscious path. The unconscious path, pain is the prod to remembrance. So what I love is that, and this comes from Yogananda too, is basically that everybody's on a spiritual path, whether they know it or not, basically. And so those who don't know it are basically on the unconscious path. And pain is the main teacher that, you get too far off, and pain tells you, nope, get back on the path. When you become conscious, the conscious is basically following those steps to get the clarity, then through the clarity, finding your specific alignment, which is that conviction, and then finding the courage to really embody that conviction and to make it a reality in your life. So.
Yeah. Wow. This is amazing. Thank you. And so as we're starting to wrap up here, maybe you could just give listeners a description, because many will be listening and not watching the video. So if they could just maybe not do a whole transformational breath session, but just start to get in touch with their breath, how would you describe that process?
Well, I describe it with the 3 words that I brought up earlier, and this is basically how I teach this process: full, free, and flow. If you can remember those 3 words, that's the essence of a healthy breath pattern. What I love about, there's a lot of people who teach breath work out there these days. What I'd say, the method that I teach has a slight leg up on many of them, is that we'll say that most of these techniques will provide you with an experience. If you breathe long enough in whatever form they're giving you, you'll have some kind of experience that's different than your average everyday experience. The added bonus to how I teach with the full, free, flowing breath pattern is that not only will it provide you with an experience that will release emotions or get you aligned or what have you, but it's reinforcing a healthy breath pattern, so that ultimately every breath that you breathe will be full, free, and flowing. And that every moment of your life then becomes a transformational experience, versus you going off to some session and learning to breathe and breathing this way and clearing out all your garbage, and then going back into life and piling more garbage on you, so that you come back to a session and got to unload it all. You start breathing that way, and your life starts aligning to the same the same clarity and conviction that you get when you're doing these isolated sessions, what I call therapeutic sessions of breath work. So there's nothing wrong with doing those therapeutic sessions. In fact, that's what keeps me in business.
Right.
But again, my goal is to get you to breathe such a way that every breath you take is a transformational experience. And that goes by, if you in the process, you're breathing a healthy breath that you could take into your life, then eventually you're going to habituate your breathing to that pattern. And that's going to be your baseline pattern, not the fight or flight pattern, or the constantly holding your breath pattern, or those things that create dysfunctional or less savory emotional experiences in your life.
Yeah, I mean, as you describe it, what's coming to me is it just literally is the way that we step into. It's almost like a different reality, or a different, not to get too woo-woo, but a different dimension when you're breathing like that, and it takes awareness, right? And then when you have awareness, life does become like a kaleidoscope. It's constantly, you're creating. You're not projecting, you have vision instead of projection, and you're not chasing, you're creating. It's just a completely different orientation to life, isn't it?
Well, exactly. And how I would describe that from a spiritual perspective, so maybe it gets woo-woo, maybe it doesn't, but from the monastic life, we learn that there's the concept of prana. Prana, you may have heard that. People who've done yoga hear the word prana all the time. Prana is basically a Sanskrit word for life force energy. So it is prana, or these particles of life force, which essentially are what bring us to life, which activate these otherwise inert lumps of clay to be thinking, feeling, mobile, sentient beings that have a capacity to think and understand, basically. So as we bring, let's say oxygen is laden with prana, and in fact everything that we consume has prana in it. It's the prana that we're ultimately distilling from the food we eat, the liquids we drink, and ultimately the air we breathe, to keep us alive and keep us thriving. And in fact, to go one step further, meditation, all that is designed to try to get us in direct contact with that prana, so that we don't even have to consume anything, but we can actually have a direct link to replenishing our being with that. Breathwork is somewhere, right on the edge of that, but we're still consuming the oxygen, which is, we're distilling the prana into our body. When we get that prana is intelligent. The prana contains the intelligence of creation. So when more of that actually floods our physical field, our brain, our thoughts, our emotions all start to align or magnetically get in alignment with that intelligence. So the thoughts that come to us become more intuitive. We just start getting downloads of understandings or information that, again, is more in alignment with our higher self way of living, rather than our lower egoic self way of living. And that's where it seems new, or seems like we have these different thoughts, but really these are the ways that are more in alignment with who we truly are at a soul level. Mm-hmm. And what we're thinking on a day-to-day basis is really, most of it was taught to us by somebody who didn't know what they were talking about in the first place.
Right. There you go. You just gave the formula to a high vibrational life. That's perfect. So we need to start with our breath. And so with that, I want to thank you for being with us today. And it was a wonderful conversation with so many nuggets. And if people want to find you, they can go to your website, which I was able to find you by typing in breathflow.com.
Yeah, breathflow.com is one of my sites. Breathflow.com points to that site, or christianminson.com points to that site. So whether you like me or you like the concept of breath flow, then
either way gets you there. Yeah. So I once heard a podcaster ask their guest a question that I would like to ask you. I thought it was so profound. And what would you tell your 12-year-old self today if you could speak to him?
Oh boy. I'd say, keep playing that guitar. That's probably what I would tell him. You're going to get really good someday, and don't wait till you're 50 to get that good. That's serious, by the way. I would tell him that.
Okay. All right.
But, I would tell him to take more chances, life is about experience. In fact, I'm writing about this now. We got the tree of life, which is experience, and the tree of knowledge, which is our understanding. Mm-hmm. And so often we take the tree of knowledge and think that it's the tree of life. And then we say, all right, well, we know what life is because we have the knowledge. but the tree of life is always slightly different, or as close as we can get in knowledge. It's still not life until we've experienced it, and the only way to experience it is to go out there and do it, try, and so to take more risks, do things that you think you might like, or act on your desires and such. And if they're not right for you, it will become apparent, and that experience, what a lot of people would call failure, is just an experience that has told you that wasn't the right way. And to me, that's a success, because otherwise, in fear of failing, you never try, or you never do. So you never actually know what the right way is. Those who fail or tried and it wasn't the right way have much more knowledge for which way is the right way, and then can regroup and go in a new direction. Those who stay on the sidelines and try to figure it out until they know the right way rarely ever find it, if even they try at that point. And so
Exactly. So
try, get out there and live your desires.
beautiful. Take more chances, practice guitar, and breathe. Okay. Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you for being with us today.
No, Kimberly, thank you for having me. It's a beautiful interview. I appreciate it greatly.
Awesome. Thank you.